Maybe Suna. I'm a trustee of the club, and I'm filling in for John Schetzel, who sends along his regrets. He unfortunately could not be here today. And before we get started, I have 4 announcements to make. 2 are related to upcoming events. So the next event for the club will be in person. In fact, the next 2 events are in person. It's with David Jenkins, who's the COO of the Browns. It's on February 24th. It's at Nuevo, which is right next door to Brown Stadium. And for those of you like me who are still not over your disappointment in the Brown season, I promise this is a quarterback controversy-free event. The topic is lakefront development. You've probably read about it in the Plain Dealer. The Browns have very impressive plans to build a land bridge over the shoreway and to really improve the connectivity between downtown and the lake. And we're going to learn all about it. So that's February 24th, right next door to Cleveland Browns Stadium. On February 28th is a patron dinner. It's at the Union Club. It's the chef's table dinner. This is one of the best meals you will have in Cleveland. We'll hear from the chef about his selections, where he gets his food and so forth. Last year we did the event virtually, and it was really good even when I cooked it. So that says a lot about the quality of this event. It's only for patron members. So if you're not a patron member, you're in the club, shoot me a chat. I'll help you get hooked up with that. It's not one to miss. So
you welcome more patrons.
Exactly. This is a patron exclusive event. Third announcement. We are going to have breakout groups. This is not something we've done in a lot of our meetings. I love the virtual because it's easy to attend. We don't have to drive. I have to admit, I miss talking to everyone and networking and meeting some new people. So especially for those of you, I know you may be driving or so forth, but if you can turn on your camera, it really helps with the breakout group. And lastly, this is one of the best panels I think we've ever had in a HBS meeting. We just have a fantastic group. You're going to hear from them shortly. I really want to thank Clay Rankin for pulling this together. If more people help Clay, you can kind of chime in. I wasn't involved in the planning. I just know Clay had a big role. So thank you, Clay, for pulling it all together. This is just a terrific topic and some great people together. I think we're going to have some very good discussion. So lastly, not an announcement, but I want to hand it over to our moderator. I promised him I would do a very short introduction. So I will do that. I urge you to Google our guest, Michael Goldberg. He's the inaugural executive director of the Veal Institute of Entrepreneurship. If you do take the time to Google and look more up about his background, you'll just be wowed by the number of students he's taught, the number of places he's lived and taught, and then also the wealth of experience he brings from the private sector to his role as a teacher at Case of Entrepreneurship. So with that, to kind of set the ground rules and get us going and introduce the panels, Michael, hand it over to you.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, Doug. And it's good to see some familiar faces and some new faces as well. And Clay, thank you. I don't know if Clay is on yet, but thanks to Clay Rankin, who was the kind of driving force to bring some of the folks together. What we're going to do is I'll quickly ask our panelists, and I'll sort of call on them to do a brief intro, although a number of them you probably know well because they're members of the club and certainly leaders of our innovation community here in Cleveland. And we're thrilled that Pete Wilkins is joining us from Chicago as well. Most of the others, including Bob Pavey out in the Bay Area and David Boone currently in New York, have strong Cleveland ties, or at least live part of the year here. So we'll do quick intros of the panel. Then, as Doug mentioned, we'll go right into breakout rooms. Julia is going to put a panelist in each of the breakout rooms, and we'll talk about kind of the objectives of that, but really as a chance to kind of allow for more of a free flow of conversation. And then we'll come back after the breakouts and kind of share some of the discussion that happens there and for the broader panel. So let me, with that, I'll go to my good friend and Case Western Reserve board member, Bob Pavey, for a quick introduction first.
All right, Bob Pavey. I'm an old venture capitalist. I've been doing venture capital so long. I'm useless for anything else, and done this long enough that I'm even humble about venture capital. David Morgenthaler recruited me out of that well-known business school on the Charles in 1967 to join a little company that in Cleveland that, by the way, was venture funded by J.H. Whitney. So this history of some venture funding in Cleveland goes all the way back to 67. At the time, Dave was running the company. He then sold out and started his own venture capital firm. It was the second venture capital firm in Cleveland. I think Bob Grease had the first, an SBIC, and had the silly idea that a young MBA might be an interesting addition. So I joined Dave in '69 in the venture business, and have been at it since.
Great. Thanks, Bob. Todd Fetterman is next on my screen, and congratulations to North Coast Ventures. I'll put the link to Cranes if it's not behind the paywall for those that can see their chat, but good news this week announced by North Coast Ventures.
Thank you, Michael. Todd Fetterman, along with Clay Rankin, I am the managing director of North Coast Ventures. We have been doing this since 2006 when we partnered with Ray and Jumpstart to try to build an angel group in Cleveland. It was the first time that had been attempted. We'd seen it in other parts of the state and the country. And the idea was to have a professional management layer work with individual investors and founders of entrepreneurial ventures to try to increase the quality of the outcomes, to attract more deals, to make better decisions, and ultimately to help those companies be more successful. So over the past 15 years, we've invested in nearly 70 companies. And as you might imagine, we've had some intriguing and encouraging success stories, learned a lot along the way, become more focused, and are more enthusiastic than I think we've been over the potential and what it is that we think we can do here in Northeast Ohio to build more great startups.
Great. Thank you, Todd. I'm going to do a little for those that are on Zoom and on chat. I'm just going to paste some links in there. So I put the North Coast Venture link, and I will also put the Hyde Park Angels link in there. Pete Wilkins, thank you for joining us from Chicago. And yeah, if you can introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Certainly. You know, I'm glad that I'm joining some Cleveland Browns fans, because I think that we're in the same boat, being a Bears fan. A lot of years since we've won a championship. That said, Pete Wilkins, I'm the managing director of Hyde Park Angels, HPA. I have been running the group for about 8 years now. We've been in existence for about 15. We are the equivalent of about a $75 million fund, but we are angel investors, meaning that our investors invest deal by deal. We have 52 active portfolio companies. Our success has certainly been demonstrated by a similar philosophy that I heard. Fundamentally, we maximize our financial capital through our human capital, and that's been able to really bear out in our portfolio success. So super excited to provide some perspective. One of the things, we're the most active early stage investor in Chicago. We're active in the Midwest, but given our concentration is only within that area, we seem to be able to get a pretty wide swath of activity that ranges from CPG to deep tech. So we have a lot of spectrum of what we invest behind.
Great. Thanks, Pete. It's great to have you here. Ray Leach.
Good afternoon, everybody. Ray Leach, founding CEO of Jumpstart. We're a 17-year experiment, still working on in the lab. We've invested, as of today, we've invested $71 million in 142 companies. And interestingly, 48.6% of those companies are led by women or people of color, which that's the most recent stat looking at our dashboard here. But our portfolio companies have raised about $3 billion in follow-on capital. And we're very excited about returns. So as an example, the first 11 million that we invested at the pre-seed stage has returned 72 million cash on cash to Jumpstart's mission and activity. And our portfolio companies last year employed about 7,000 people in Ohio. So We were founded as a 501c3 by many of you on the screen. Great to see Dan Moore and many others who were very involved in the early days of Jumpstart. And the mothership of Jumpstart is still a nonprofit, but we have launched 2 for-profit funds, a $20 million fund that's fully invested. And now we're closing out a $50 million fund that is already invested in 3 companies. So we're really on the investing side, as it relates to venture in particular, we're really focused on participating in Series A's, which, in Ohio right now are probably on average $8 to $12 million. So we're writing multiple $1 million checks in Series A rounds, and also have $28 million that we're currently investing at the seed stage. So I would say in terms of been at it a long time, but probably never more bullish about Cleveland and Ohio and the tech ecosystem in the Midwest than we are right now. Great to be with you.
Thanks, Ray. All right, speaking of your portfolio CEOs, last but not least, David Boone.
Cool. Thanks, Michael, for introducing me. Hi, I am David Boone, founder and CEO of Blend Ed. We're a platform to help college instructors build better courses. And fortunately enough, we've received investments now from Jumpstart twice in both rounds of fundraising, even in the earliest days from their validation fund. And just a little bit about me, grew up in Cleveland, born and raised on the East Side. First in my family go to college, went off to work at Microsoft, where I built really cool high-tech applications and worked in data science and had a lot of fun. But in my time there, I always knew that I wanted to return to Cleveland. And so the last year or so of me being there, I spent a lot of time in Cleveland, about a week a month on Microsoft's dime to try and plug into this sort of ecosystem that was budding around entrepreneurship. And at that time, there's a lot of blockland stuff and other things. And some of those things have died down, but met some really awesome people. And in the last, I guess it's been 2 years now, moved back to Cleveland and found a company. So have been all over the place, lived in Boston, Seattle, spent some time in New York, but think that Cleveland is the place where I should build my business. And so that's what I've been doing.
Thanks, David. And I'm lucky because he sits right down the hall from me at ThinkBox here at Case Western, which is fun. So we are going to move into breakout rooms. Again, I know some of you are joining from cars and hopefully you can sort of participate. When we were putting this panel together, actually, Clay, even before the Intel news broke, was when we first started sharing some emails with between some of the panelists about things that were happening in other regions, things that perhaps could be improved in Cleveland. I think a number of you have deep connectivity through second homes or places that you've spent time, or even through your kids. Obviously, Pete is based in Chicago. But we'd like to use this time in the breakout room to hear from each of you with at least sort of 2 suggestions or insights around ways that we can improve the ecosystem here in Cleveland. Many of you, I know are entrepreneurs. I see a number of folks that have sort of raised capital, folks that have raised capital here in Cleveland, some folks that have raised capital outside of Cleveland because they haven't been able to put together funding syndicates here. So there's a ton of expertise on this call. We thought breakouts would be a fun way to engage you with panelists. And then what we'll do is we'll come back here together and I'll ask each of the panelists to share some of the insights that came up during the breakout rooms. And then we'll have some broader questions that we can explore. It's funny when Julia and I were talking about how long to put in a breakout rooms. I'm always like, it always goes so fast. So I don't know about the other groups, but we had a great group of 4 and we just, there was too much to talk about. So let's, now that we are back, maybe I will kind of go around perhaps in the reverse order in which I called on you the first time to kind of summarize some of the interesting points of discussion that came up during the conversation as we sort of feed it into the broader group. David Boone, do you want to go first and share your insights and maybe even just mention the folks that were in your group if you have time as well, just so we know who you were chatting with.
For sure. So I was in the room with Doug and Clay, and I feel bad for those 2 because I did all the talking.
Oh, it was good.
What a surprise.
The highlights in our discussion were really around, how do we solve for some of the early stage, sort of like 0 to 1 scenarios in the region. Clay spoke a lot about, the sort of gap in accelerators and sort of incubator type of spaces for founders. And I spoke a little bit about just some of those very, very early dollars and how we kind of create a good ecosystem for, I just have an idea and I don't have any money, but I know that this idea has some weight and it could turn into something more. The other piece that we sort of got just talking about is, how do we bring things from the outside in, particularly talent and people, and how do we kind of create, talent density in the city that stays around, right? That sticks. That's not just tied to being at the institution for 4 to 6 to 8 years to get your degree or advanced degree, and then you move on to other things. But how do you create an environment, an ecosystem where people, see the value of staying and being a part of the ecosystem long term. So we spoke, a few different ideas there. I sent a link in a group, 43 North, which is an example of how Buffalo is going after, some of this in the early stage incubation type of phase, and how do you get companies to come and sort of like build roots and get tied to the ecosystem there. So that was the bulk of it. Did I miss anything, guys?
I think the only thing I might add is that as you've built your business, you've had challenges sort of getting support from local institutions that we would like, ideally have hoped would open their doors to support an entrepreneurial effort. And it's been difficult to do that.
Yeah, there have been some great partners, so I don't want to make it all bad, because there's definitely been folks that work with me. Lorain County Community College has worked with me. I've gotten into case now. We've been working together. So, but yeah, some of those early days, it was kind of difficult to crack into institutions, particularly the larger ones.
Great. Thanks, David and Doug and Clay. Ray, I think you would have been, you're next in the reverse order, if you wouldn't mind. Yeah, you're on mute, Ray, sorry.
I had the pleasure of working with Dennis Schwartz, Dan Moore, Liz Powell, and Larry Murray. And we had a great conversation that really honed in on a handful of things. First was really around how Cleveland can do a better job to engage and educate entrepreneurs across the spectrum, not just venture back, but a broader spectrum on how to fund their companies, with non-dilutive and dilutive funding. What are the options and opportunities to fund the company? Also to share stories of what's going on in the entrepreneurial ecosystem more broadly, whether it's an entrepreneurial story or the story of a particular company, but just there isn't enough awareness of what's going on across the economy, or is not as much awareness as there could be. We also talked a little bit about, culture and the entrepreneurial culture of Cleveland, and what could we do. While I think the general consensus was Cleveland's culture is getting more entrepreneurial, slowly but surely maybe, but getting a little bit more entrepreneurial. But how might we be able to better engage with younger entrepreneurs? And I'm saying like high school and middle school kids, as well as young adults, to help them have a better understanding of what it means to be an entrepreneur, and whether they even, as an example, have the personality to be an entrepreneur. Like, how do they deal with stress? How do they deal with uncertainty? How do they deal with complex problem solving? So, I think a lot of, and one of the benefits certainly of that, I think, is to prevent people from wasting their time around entrepreneurship, either with a bad idea or maybe by doing it by themselves as opposed to with a team. That's another issue that I think we see. But at the end of the day, we want entrepreneurs to be working on business concepts and opportunities that are meaningful. And meaningful could be different things for different people. Not everything's going to be a venture-backed company, but really, how can we take the lessons learned of our community and of the subject matter experts and pools of capital to build a better, stronger, and connected understanding to what's going on and where opportunities are to have a clearer sense of what it looks like to do the work. And of course, for our community to support those individuals who are taking on entrepreneurial ventures of any type. So it had a lot to do with kind of the cultural side and the educational side is what we ended up talking about.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for sharing, Ray. I think next would be Pete.
All right, I'm really impressed by the other panelists, their ability to recall everything that was in there. So I have an asterisk. I'm sure I'm going to lose out, but I feel the conversation will continue in the rest of the panel. But Tanzi, John, Peter, and Neil were part of the group that we were in. I think that, you know, one of the core elements was how does diversity across multiple spectrums ultimately improve the success rate. And so we talked a little bit about looking at it from a gender and ethnicity, but also an experience perspective and how that contributes. I mentioned a little bit from a Chicago perspective, how that was a real critical element in forced kind of an evolution of the ecosystem, getting out of kind of a central hub. How do you fundamentally do that? There's a lot of work to be done, but I think that we spoke about that. We also talked about how do we help younger entrepreneurs move from idea to action? What are some of the fundamental ways to do that and keep them engaged? And then what are areas within a community that can actually hold or to be able to organize from a hub perspective, a place to highlight what is being done, being able to communicate that to those that are external that are coming into the community, as well as internally to show them what is successful. Now, that was also something that I brought to the table. So I'm probably putting words into my friends' mouths, and friends I probably use loosely, but that was my quick summary. I'm sure I forgot some stuff, but hopefully that was a relatively decent summary.
Great. Thanks, Pete. Todd.
Yeah, so we had a lively conversation as well. The group included Brad Pulver, Fred Clark, Karen Lowridge, and Tom Waltemeyer. Interestingly, two of those are investors in North Coast Ventures. We had an entrepreneur in the mix and a teacher. So I'd say broad set of perspectives there. And the conversation really focused around entrepreneurs and what they want and need from the community. I think some of the perspective kind of centered around Brad and multiple businesses that he's had, as well as Fred Clark and a company that he's been very involved with in the advanced materials space. I think one of the insights there is just that in a combination of shifting past the raising money point to where you're working on making money, you're a little less connected into the ecosystem. COVID certainly was a big blocker to being actively involved in the ecosystem, as well as in the case of life science businesses, not having bioenterprise around anymore. So I think there was a little bit of a feeling of lack of connection, maybe a feeling of wishing there were more kind of post 101 places to connect. So deeper after you get started, right? How to find insights on specific hot topics of real interest and need for companies. And maybe that gets to more density of people who have the specific background and insight. So I'm not sure we solved the problem, but I think the concept there was on a kind of case-by-case basis, how do you provide more meaningful, deeper value for entrepreneurs who are at an inflection point and could use that new set of open doors and opportunities.
Great. Thanks, Todd. Bob.
Well, I don't know that we came to any great conclusions, Ethan and David. The concerns were those that I think we all understand: lack of experienced management talent, and lack of early focus on the computer science industry. The belief many years ago in Cleveland was we could focus on manufacturing and material science, and that made sense from a background point of view. But guess what? well over 50% of the money in the venture industry over the last 50 years has been made in computer science, one sort or another, electronics and computer science. Carnegie Mellon bet on that while we bet on material science. And it made sense at the time, but it was not the bet that was going to create nearly as much entrepreneurship. So we got a lot of catch up to do, not only with Carnegie Mellon, but with Columbus, which was a big cow town when I grew up in Dayton, but has done really well entrepreneurial. I don't know, Ray, is there anything we could have done to have held on to cover my meds? If we had that in Cleveland, that would do. We need more winners here, guys, and that's really what we talked about.
Sorry, I actually also had a group. So I had Bill, Tony, and Lee Weingart. Interestingly, some similar themes. Actually, we did talk specifically about Pittsburgh and Columbus and some of the elements that made those ecosystems perhaps a little more successful, and some of the integration. I mean, one topic that we discussed, something that Ray and I have talked a lot about in the past, is around the role of the universities and the R1 universities in Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon and Pitt, and the collaboration in the ecosystem, and you know, where Case has been and where we could go in the future. You know, some good discussions around, you know, even kind of in our ecosystem now, you know, I mean, Jumpstart's evolution to initially focusing on only deploying capital and you know, growing your program to reach different constituencies while still having pools of capital that you're raising and deploying. So it was a good discussion. Again, some of the same topics that were covered in other areas, but I think appreciated hearing from the others. And now let's bring it all together as a larger group. You know, maybe we can sort of start with our panel based on something that you heard from another group. And Bob, maybe I'll sort of start with you. As you heard the updates from the other groups, whether it's sort of a David's comments around needs for accelerators or better supportive company, was there something that you heard in the report back from some of the other group that sort of caught your ear as an area where, as we look forward in Cleveland to perhaps addressing some of the gaps in our ecosystem where we could make progress?
Well, I'm a hard guy on this sort of thing. I warned Clay when he asked me to do this that I'm a stupid optimist. You don't do venture capital for 50 years and be a pessimist. You die. You die a long time ago. So I look past the problems and look to the successes. I see good things happening. I think Dave Morgenthaler kind of helped Ray get some money at the very beginning, and that's I wasn't sure it was going to produce anything, but David was much smarter than I was, and he proved
Either
he
was
right.
either was I. I wasn't sure either.
He backed Ray, but you know, David, many years ago, David, because Lindsay, his wife, had gone to Carnegie Mellon, gave some money to Carnegie Mellon to fund an entrepreneurship program. And I'll bet it was maybe even 40 years ago. You may know, Michael, when Jack Thorne was recruited to Carnegie Mellon to do what you're doing now, 40 years later. Well, I got to tell you, it didn't pay dividends right away. I went down and looked at some of the stuff that he was working with in the early days, and it wasn't anything that we wanted to do. So this is a long-term effort, and we started out behind some of these others, and we got work to do to catch up. But you know, I told David Boone when he sort of said, "Gee, why couldn't I raise all my money in Cleveland?" And I said, "Well, how many people did you talk to?" And David, what was the answer? 95 or?
Yeah.
I mean, there aren't 95. There aren't even 95 people in New York to talk. Well, maybe there are in New York to talk to. You got to find. It's like getting married. You got to find somebody where the chemistry's right and the fit's right and the vision is right, and it works, and you get them at the right time. And you just need to look at a broader range of people. And boy, to your credit, David, you got a little money from Jumpstart and Bob Pavey and then you went out and found the money wherever it existed. That's what entrepreneurs do.
Appreciate that.
David, maybe it's a good chance. You want to chime in on kind of in this forward-looking piece based on your own experience and being back in Cleveland. I mean, and you've only been back. How long have you been back? Has it been a year? And
It's been 2 now. It's
2
been
years?
2 years now. Yep. So yeah, happy to chime in. So I share optimism with Bob because as an entrepreneur, you have to be pretty optimistic as well. But as an operator, you have to be very, very realistic. So I have to balance both sort of at the same time. And what I'll say about Cleveland is, really, I wouldn't do it differently. And like Bob mentioned, starting a company is just hard, right? You have to talk to a bunch of people, both in terms of fundraising and in terms of, really narrowing in on what the product's going to be, what the market for that product is. And, there's just a lot of discussion that has to happen. And so you go wherever the doors are open. And a lot of doors are open in Cleveland, and they were super helpful, especially in those early days. But as a founder, I've had to be, like Bob said, really creative about finding those doors elsewhere. And that's one thing that I would say that the pandemic, really helped with, because all of a sudden funds were willing to talk to a little company in Cleveland that wouldn't have talked to me before, that maybe wouldn't have written a check so early in a company in Cleveland and would have only written in their region. And so,
David, you're so impressive that you're going to talk, anybody's going to talk to you.
I wish that was true, but some folks do. But I even, I had a couple of folks who said, hey, look, we really don't write checks. And now they're changing their tune. We really don't write checks this early outside of Boston, right? Because that's where we sort of operate and play, and we like to be close to an early check. So, there's dynamics that have shifted due to the pandemic that actually make it, I think, a little bit easier to get started in this ecosystem. But what I would say about that, and Bob's right, it is a long play, is how do we bring more of that to the ecosystem? Because, at the end of the day, the thing that makes Silicon Valley so great, so it doesn't matter what stage of founder you are, you can find the 2 most important things to a CEO. That is talent and money, right? You don't want to run out of money, and you want to hire really great people to make your dream come true, right? And that's the unique, ecosystem that exists there. And it exists to some extent in other places and in other disciplines, right? Boston has it in biosciences, unlike anyone else, right? Anywhere else, right? And New York has it in finance, unlike anywhere else. Cleveland, I think, has to start to think about how we create that tight ecosystem here as well, so that the ingredients, it's not a search problem, right? They're abundant. It's just a matter of finding that chemistry that Bob was talking about, right? But it's not actually trying to find the doors. And so that's my point of view after hearing some of the other comments. And I think it's really in line of how do you educate people? How do you bring the level of understanding and investment up in the region? Some of it is just like growing the density and bringing folks to the table who kind of already have some of that experience to mentor and advise, and to be that middle layer of management that I think I heard someone else talk about, because that's another thing you have to think about as an operator, is who's going to be my first COO, right, at an early stage company. That's different than the COO at Key Bank or elsewhere, right? That person has to have a unique skill set. I'm going to find hundreds of them in other areas, but it's going to be tough here in Cleveland.
I see a couple of folks who have unmuted, which I'm guessing might be whether it's Clay or Neil or others who are Ray, who want to make a comment. So Ray, I think I saw you unmute first, then Clay, and then Neil. I don't know if you were unmuting to make a comment, but Ray, why don't we go with you first?
Well, I'll ask, I don't know that this is provocative, but I spend a lot of time thinking about this question all day, every day. And I guess a simple analogy that most of us would understand is, or a simple example, what changed in Columbus? Yes, it's true they have Ohio State. Yes, it's true they have 60,000 undergrads. There was nothing going on in Columbus 10 years ago, 15 years ago, compared to Cleveland. So what changed? Well, I think there's a handful of things that changed. one could say Drive Capital, but in reality, nothing changed in Columbus with Drive until about 2018. And what changed, other than a great team, there was a great team that had 250 million to invest. When Columbus started to accelerate was when Drive started to move their companies to Cleveland. So when those
Columbus, yeah.
to Columbus. So when they had the ability at the Series B or C to control where the company is going to be located, they're like, well, if you want our 20 million, you got to move the company to Columbus. And that created a catalyst of change, but that wasn't overnight, so it wasn't only the capital that they had. Now Drive's going to have over 3 billion in capital within a year. So the success of that first fund and the success from an economic development point of view. So that's one example. That's one way to make progress. But I would argue an equally, if not more compelling way was leadership from the healthcare institutions in Columbus. Nationwide Children's, the leader at Nationwide Children's in and around commercialization has as much to do about what's gone on in Columbus over the last 10 years than, has a compelling amount to do than Drive. So the leaders there at Nationwide Children's didn't want to do it alone. They wanted to collaborate. They got investment from across the state. It happened to be in biopharma where a lot of the activity was. But I would say, I guess the question for the group that I've thought a lot about is this chicken or egg problem. Is there a chicken or egg problem in Cleveland? In other words, is the only way to solve this material acceleration problem a large pool of capital that is managed by a very, very successful team? I know that would help. If we had a 250 million or $500 million fund headquartered in Cleveland, run by individuals that have the track record of a Mark Kwame or a Chris Olson, it would help. But I don't think that's the only way that we can, and I'm working very, very hard to recruit a team to be that fund. So I think we can accomplish that. But I think, that didn't make a difference in Columbus for the first 5-6 years. And there's no guarantee that a $250 million fund headquartered in Cleveland is going to make a difference to Cleveland. It could, but there's no guarantee. So really, to me, I think, having been doing this job for so long, it's up to individual leaders who are leading important institutions of innovation or correlated to innovation that I think we can, could, and should be calling on or recruiting and or motivating. The new president of CASE, as an example, Eric Kaler. If we can get these people in power to act in more entrepreneurial ways, I think we have a chance. But it's going to take a half a dozen, just like, you're investing in a bunch of startups. You don't know which one's going to be successful. We need a half a dozen to a dozen initiatives or leaders, new things to step up, I think, to give us the opportunity to really make a lot of progress in the next decade. So, in my mind, I spent a lot of time thinking about, in addition to a larger fund, what are those things? Who are those leaders? And how should folks like us convince them to take it more seriously, maybe? Or how could we support them to do something that we think has a chance to ultimately be really meaningful, knowing it's going to take 5 to 10 years until anything that's done actually has the ability to be significantly measured. So I guess in summary, leadership of people in power and of influence matters tremendously. And Cleveland hasn't had enough of those people acting in a way like they have in other cities to make the difference that I think we aspire to see here.
Thanks, Ray. Clay, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think Ray's point is a really important one. And my sense is that's a lot of what led to the success in Pittsburgh. The corporate community, the medical community, the university community, all getting together and supporting it. And I'd love to reach out to Tom Waldermeyer, who headed up Team Neo for a while, and just see whether did he disappear? I think he did. My golly, I can't believe it. He was there. He's there.
He's here.
You know, as head of Team Neo, I would have thought you might have some perspective on the corporate community, and why is it difficult to get the kind of leadership that Ray was talking about?
Well, that you you actually made the question easier by saying, why is it harder to get the corporate community? I think the simple answer, unfortunately, is too much of a cliche answer, is that they the biggest ones are global. They're under more shareholder pressure, you know, just generally about their broad, you know, their broad international interests than they are in their civic interests. And that's a really regrettable change over the last 20 years or so. I think it's instructive and certainly good luck for Columbus to have a leader of National Children's who took that kind of role. Now there's an institution that is grounded in that community and is focused completely on that community. And I don't know if any of us on the outside know all the reasons that bioenterprise wasn't recreated. You know, we saw some of the reasons why it ran into a patch and some problems and fell apart, but why hasn't it been recreated? You know, why hasn't the head of the clinic and et cetera, and Case come together to create it again? You know, they've created the innovation project, and Ray, you're probably the one on this panel who's engaged in that. I'd be curious whether the innovation project that has gathered the creme de la creme of leadership in the community, whether this topic we're on here is even on the radar screen for that group.
Well, it's so one of the unfortunate scenarios of naming is that there's this thing called the Cleveland Innovation Project, which has Team Neo and the Fund for Economic Future and GCP and Jumpstart and the Cleveland Foundation. Then there's the Cleveland Innovation District that has $500 million from the state.
Right.
That is Metro, Case, Cleveland State, the clinic, and UH. And very much to your point, Tom, you know, those institutions, I mean, obviously Metro and Case and Cleveland State are very connected to the community. And I would say the clinic is a global enterprise.
Right.
And they're all getting, you know, they're splitting $500 million to advance their own initiatives. Yes, Jobs Ohio is giving them a lot of that money, and there's a connection to Team Neo in that regard, but the state's giving them a lot of money. And I would say I've been very frustrated and disappointed by how little the right hand of the Cleveland Innovation District, how coordinated they are across the 5 of them, let alone to the community. So I do think it kind of comes back to this scenario of how do we better collaborate? How do we win together? How, you know, can we figure out, and I think we're doing much better than we were 10 years ago, I would say, but can we figure out and continue to figure out where the win-wins are and to partner in those things? You know, I don't think there's anybody on the call that works for the Cleveland Clinic, but my belief this whole time I've been here, if the Cleveland Clinic decided to transform the innovation economy of Cleveland, it could do it, no problem. It's got the money, it's got the resources, it has the relationships. It could single-handedly dramatically advance the innovation ecosystem in Cleveland. It's just not important to them.
Yeah, and Cleveland Clinic Innovations is not what it even was.
Oh, correct. Absolutely.
What they're doing has atrophied over the last 10 years.
So I have I'm much, I think, younger than most on this call. And so my perspective is obviously a little bit formed by ignorance, right? Of just like what has happened, what has been tried, and what hasn't. But I also like feel in some ways, yes, these institutions could, wave their hands and things could change. But, we know that the priority isn't to lead that change. And so are there steps, we could take in this room to lead that change? Because I have a hard time believing that they simply wouldn't do it, right? They just need the right opportunity to do it, whatever it is that we're trying to get them to do, right? Like I have a hard time believing that they would just, it's a great opportunity to have this impact that, wouldn't involve some massive reorg within their organization or whatever the case may be. And they would just go, nope, no interest, right? I think that there's too much goodwill and good faith in their brand and their affiliation to Cleveland, right? To simply say, I won't help. So like, what is it that, because there's some movers and shakers on this call, right? Like 71 million invested is not a small thing, right? Like, 60 companies invested, raised over 3 billion, follow on, not a small thing, right? There's folks here, how do we organize an effort that, brings these folks to the table? And then, second part of that question is, how do you make sure that these initiatives don't become a scenario where, 3 organizations partner up, get some monies, and then they go into their separate corners and do uncoordinated things, which is kind of what I heard about the 500 million. I may be mishearing that, but that doesn't seem like an ecosystem play either, right? That seems like a cash grab. And so like, also, if we are going to create these opportunities, how do we incentivize them to be ecosystem plays that are sustainable, right? And again, all informed by ignorance. So tell me, hey, that's been tried before, done, whatever.
No, and there's been too much competition between the clinic and UH and Case Western Reserve for years. But guess what, guys? It's starting to change too. Toby Cosgrove heard that Microsoft wanted to find a home for its work in augmented reality as it applies to medical education. So he grabbed Barbara Snyder and they flew out to the West Coast and convinced Microsoft to make Cleveland the center for applying augmented reality into medical education. And the result is the work that Mark Griswold is doing, which is game changing. Has now been picked up by a number of other universities around the country. So there are little examples of what happens when they work together. It's not that it doesn't happen. We need more of it, and we need more momentum. But Toby and Barbara have both moved on, so the new leaders have to step up and do more of the same, right, guys?
Yeah, and I do think there is the opportunity, but David, we'll go have a beer or have some coffee, because this is all I do all day long, every day.
Sounds good.
This is a great conversation. Neil, I know you had unmuted earlier. Did you have a question that you wanted to ask or a comment?
Not a question, but a comment. The Harvard Business School Club of Cleveland, I mean, David touched on it. We want to do something. We want to help. We have done a lot of big things, and I'm thinking, how we support entrepreneurship and business education with our limited funds, but we've had conferences. We could do an entrepreneurship fair. We could do whatever would help, and we're eager to hear your ideas on what we might do to help.
Well, my 2 cents on that is really around leadership. I think, the Harvard Business School would be a great group to call on our community leaders to act and do things differently. And, it is a voice. And by the way, there are things that they are acting and doing differently, but we need a lot more of it. It's not like there's none, but even to the point, like we were talking earlier on the pre-call of like, could we as a community celebrate someone that demonstrates what we're talking about in the community? That's whether it's an institutional leader or a community leader who is an illustration of what we're talking about. Because right now oftentimes I get into these conversations and there really isn't a great example of someone in Cleveland like there is in Pittsburgh. or Cincinnati or Indianapolis, or so like we have to create role models, or we have to celebrate I think we have an opportunity to celebrate the kind of leadership that we are talking about.
Right.
And, you know, I'm not asking the Harvard Business School group to own that per se. I think we as a community have an opportunity to collaborate to own that. But certainly the Harvard Business School's voice is incredibly important and relevant, incredible, amongst others. So I do think it's like this whole, you know, we have a bunch of chicken and egg kind of scenarios. And so what are the half a dozen things? And one of them, I think, I definitely think I'd love to talk more about what the Harvard Business School could do that isn't expensive. It's really more about your capital your social capital, your leadership, thought, intellectual capital in the community that could be leveraged. I clearly think there's an opportunity to do that.
Neil, joining in with the club, we already do, you probably know, Ray, we already do our Entrepreneur of the Year award.
And the Leadership Award.
And have been doing
Yes.
award for a long time. Maybe it's the center point of something that's bigger about entrepreneurship, and there's more people being recognized than just single individual, which generally, not surprisingly, becomes a testimonial to that one individual. But it's not so much a celebration of the system and the ecosystem and what's been accomplished in that system over the last year. So maybe that we can turn to a broader event that celebrates more activity and gives visibility to it, while, you know, having part of that program being celebrating.
Well, let's go back to Michael then. So Michael, what do you need to be more successful? You're relatively new in your job at the Veal Center, right? And now you have a new president out there who is committed to not being a problem, but to help with entrepreneurship. What can we do to help you and Eric and Case Western Reserve be more effective?
You would think that that was a planted question in my role as moderator.
You're moderator, but now I'm making you work, man.
No, those of you who know Bob Baby know that there's no such thing as a planted Bob Baby question. Yeah, let me reflect on that. And I'm looking at the time. We've got about I'll give a 2-minute version of it. I see Clay has his hand raised. I do want to make sure we get to Pete for kind of a Chicagoan's view now that you've been dropped into our little ecosystem for the last hour and a half. Bob, to answer your question, and you're very nice to ask, because I do think that the Case in particular, although obviously we're not the only player in higher ed in the area, just given the amount of research that's coming out of here, we need help. We need external connectivity. The one thing that Bob has done, in addition to being a great nudge as a board member and asking hard questions, is that Bob's written checks into a number of our spin-out companies. And we've talked a lot about both the philanthropy, actually, which Bob has also done in supporting a chair that supports Mark Griswold, but also investment dollars. So I think universities, and this can be the same, that's true. I mean, UH Ventures is doing some really wonderful work. I know Ethan Cohn is doing work with a spin out there. And the clinic has some new leadership and innovation. So I do think that the two pockets that many of you represent, one is philanthropy, right? And philanthropy does things like support like the Veal Institute and programming. And then there's investment. And I think many of you on this call, and whether you're doing it through Jumpstart's fund or doing it through North Coast Ventures or doing it as angels into companies, that is an area where we need more folks, whether they're, members of the HBS club or others to, and, what I love about Bob, your example is like, hey, some, whether it's Folio or Biome or others that still have runway to go, but Convello you invested in and, made a nice return and plow that into philanthropy or other investments. So I do think that the help that we need at the university comes both in philanthropy and also just like, good, honest dialogue like this, but also investing in whether again, it's not just our spin outs, but Bob, you've done that. Clay, I saw your hand raised before. Was there a comment that you wanted to make before I got to Pete for some Chicago perspectives?
Well, very briefly, I wanted to just follow up on Neil's question. I thought it was intriguing to hear David talk about 43 North in Buffalo, where, the way it was described was certain companies can apply to qualify for this. They can get a significant amount of money, and the entrepreneurs that may come with it are exempted from income tax for a period of time. Can we do something to encourage that kind of a program to be put together that draws in talent? Because a lot of what I've heard David talk about, for example, is how do we get that density of talent? How do you create the excitement in the entrepreneurial ecosystem? You can't do it unless you've got people coming together. And I'm just looking for programs like 43 North that maybe could be a catalyst for that. So, but I'd love to hear what Pete has seen in Chicago and what we can learn from him there.
Wow, I'm kind of on the spot, but happy to join in. The thing, and I've heard, I've been a participant in a few different ecosystems about this, and I think everybody struggles to find how do they really create success. And I want to first, I beat the table often. Don't compare yourself to the Valley. I mean, just exclude the Valley and then look at the rest of the United States and compare yourself to that ecosystem or those communities. And number one, you'll be a lot better. And so will every other city that you're comparing, even New York or Boston. You're surprised at how little activity there is at Austin. You look at kind of the strides that Atlanta has taken, but you'd be surprised. You're probably closer than you think because their expectations are different. I think the second thing is, I think unifying what success is, which is really, as you guys all know, coming from connections to Harvard, you cannot manage what you don't measure. So what are you measuring for success? And I think that that's a struggle that I see in Chicago as we continue to build. But is it the number of companies that have a valuation over $1 billion? Is it the number of companies that have successfully exited? Is it the number of companies that you have actually successfully funded in a year? And that could be broken down into seed, A, B. And I think that those are kind of metrics. What are we measuring to get uniformity around what we can do collectively to do together? And what is our role to actually achieve those things? And I think that creates a dialogue. And it's really it's really hard to do. But from my perspective, from some statistics, Chicago had 13 companies valued over $1 billion this year. And that was more than the previous 10 years. Now, markets certainly are inflating valuations, but still from a macro perspective, that is a huge uptick. Those companies on average have taken 7 years to get there. Coincidentally, we had 7 firms raise over $100 million. And so and collectively they raised $5.7 billion. What I would argue is it takes them less time to raise those funds. And clearly they had previous funds to get there. And I view 100 million kind of as a threshold. We probably had 5 firms that had over 100 million before. So that is an enormous step up. But I would argue that the success of those 13 companies that have over $1 billion valuation was bringing capital from outside of Chicago, where you had many of these funds that had invested in these companies. And then if I am betting on where you look at success, it's how much you are funding at a seed level, how many of those are becoming an A level, which that capital is the most inefficient for people that have limited capital to deploy. And therefore, that's where the biggest struggle is. And that's a matter of saying, okay, I'm going to bet on that. When you have more capital, you have more access to give to those opportunities that aren't proven. But a seed investment is, even if you believe in it 100%, there is so much projection of what the possibilities are that it's not like you can validate it from historical performance. And so what I argue in Chicago, and I would propose to you, is where do we focus our attention on success? And what I would propose to think about is, you're not going to be $1 billion company if you don't get a seed investment. And so, like, I think that having access to capital, and I think we have roles where you have, programs that the government can administer, so there can be tax incentives. There's also incentives from a business perspective that become unique. I think that also creating the ecosystem for incentives to bring big companies that bring talent, so that if Mr. and Mrs. Entrepreneur doesn't succeed, they can get a job somewhere else. And so I think there are all roles that go, but it's like, what do you define success? Because, I would argue that in any definition of success, like if you are, is it job creation that we're ultimately looking for? Or are we trying to create a bigger ecosystem with brand name? So that's what I've seen in Chicago. That's what the community struggles. But I think fundamentally, if we just looked at the year of 2021, I would submit that our success was on the back of entrepreneurs that fueled more venture capitalists to raise bigger funds, which that creates a stronger ecosystem. But I think you start with the entrepreneurs and actually trying to facilitate capital.
Right.
So hopefully that was helpful.
That was super helpful. Great. I will give Todd Fetterman a 60-second comment and thought before I turn it over to Doug, because I bypassed him on the panel for discussion. So give us your best 60 seconds, Todd.
All right, 60 seconds, clock ticking, and I'll do it on two different topics. The first is just, where does the support come from? I would say in the region, the individuals are doing their job. So North Coast, just as an example, we had over 200 people write a check to us over the last year for our new funds. People writing $50,000 checks, $100,000 checks, $250,000, some even $1 million. What we're not seeing is the institutions. So you cannot build a $100 million fund, a $250 million venture capital fund on the backs of only individuals in Northeast Ohio. So we're grateful and we want to see more individuals. For us to get to the next level, we need to see institutional support, and that's something that we haven't seen. The second piece is just the value of the family trees, that if we do see successful startups, those startups will breed more startups. We have several companies we've invested in where they've come out of the family tree of a company here in Cleveland called OnShift. What Columbus has seen in Cover My Meds, we've funded companies that have come out of the lineage of Cover My Meds. We've seen several come out of Root Insurance lately, and to Pete's backyard, Groupon as well. And interestingly, with Root and Groupon, not to pick on those two, but since they've gone public, both those companies have lost about 95% of their market value, right? These companies don't have to turn into the next Amazon to still be a huge success for the city and for the region, because they bring wealth through the financings. They teach entrepreneurs and product people and technologists how to be part of startups, and then they go and start more things. So we just need to get more success and keep building on it over the next several years, and that's going to go a long way.
Well, good. All right, Doug, 2 minutes left. It's funny, when we were talking about the panel, I was like, 90 minutes? What are we going to talk about for 90 minutes? And the panel was like, no, this will be good. That was a fast 90 minutes.
It was.
Glad we didn't cut it. So thank you to the panel. This was a lot of fun. Doug, back over to you, and thanks to the club members for inviting us all.
Yeah, I just hope that this is the beginning of the dialogue and not the end. I've written down so many takeaways that I'm going to take, and I plan to hook up with Neil too to figure out how the philanthropy committee can take some of these ideas and put them to work. So thank you very much to all of the panelists, Bob, Todd, Pete, Ray, David. You were terrific. Michael, you were a great moderator, and credit to Michael for suggesting the format with the breakout groups. I hope everyone enjoyed it. If you have any feedback, let us know, because we'll consider using it again for future. And Clay, now you're here in person to hear me. Thank you for pulling this all together. It's a great group. And as I said, I hope everyone came away with at least 2 takeaways and met 1 or 2 new connections that they continue to stay in touch with on this very important topic for the region. So thank you for your time and have a nice evening, everybody.
Thank you, Doug.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Doug.
Thank you, panel.
Thanks all.
Bye, guys.
Everybody.